Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that affects quite literally all of us, the invisible forces of consumerism. We're going to take a journey from the massive macroeconomy right down into the hidden psychology of your own mind. We're drawing from some really fascinating source material today, including a literal business school exam paper on luxury marketing. And together, they reveal exactly how the world around us is engineered to make us spend. So let's get into it. Think about the last time you made a really big purchase. You know the feeling, right? We've all felt that immediate thrill of buying something new. But then, it's followed almost immediately by this sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach. Well, today, we're going to uncover exactly why that happens, and more importantly, how brands are actually using that exact feeling against you. But to understand that personal feeling of guilt, we first need to zoom out and look at the massive economic machine we're all living inside of. So let's start with the big picture. Western economies basically run on what's called a hedonic treadmill at the societal level. Now, what does that mean? It means our culture is constantly reframing what is considered good enough into something that's suddenly outdated. Like your phone from last year, it works perfectly fine, but the norm moves on. Last season's clothes still fit, obviously, but fashion cycles redefine what feels current. There is this constant cultural tailwind whispering in our ears that upgrading is completely normal, expected, and honestly necessary. And as we're about to see, this is definitely no accident.
Yeah, this cultural push is entirely by design. To put this into perspective, in the United States, consumer spending makes up over 2/3 of the gross domestic product. 2/3. That means aggregate economic growth is heavily tied to you and me just continuing to buy stuff. Post-World War II America didn't just get richer, it built an entire identity around mass consumption. Buying was actually framed as a form of civic duty. Material upgrading became the ultimate visible proof that you were, doing well in life. Now, consider the sheer scale of the machine pushing this. Between 1.3% and 2% of the entire US GDP is dedicated strictly to advertising. That is a massive chunk of the economy, representing billions of dollars, and its sole purpose is to capture your attention, shape your preferences, and ultimately drive your purchases. So, when the default cultural message is upgrade and billions are being spent to reinforce it, well, treating overspending as just a personal willpower issue is a huge mistake. If it's a battle between you and the environment's going to win. Every time. And it gets trickier because this environment is heavily lubricated by credit. Credit completely changes the game. Why? Because it breaks down the natural boundary between what we desire and what we can actually afford today. From the old school Diners Club charge cards in the 1950s to the buy now, pay later apps sitting on your phone right now, these mechanisms magically lower the felt cost at checkout. You get all the benefit right now, and you just push the pain into the future. It effectively turns your fleeting everyday desires into fixed, contractual monthly obligations.
Okay, so we know the baseline. But what happens when we throw the internet into the mix? Let's take a look at how this social comparison engine goes global.
Humans have obviously always compared themselves to others. That's just nature. But social media took this and completely industrialized it. It shifted our reference group from the people living on our physical street to an algorithmically curated feed of global influencers. You aren't just seeing what your neighbor bought anymore. You are seeing perfectly upgraded kitchens, business class flights, and luxury meals on a relentless daily drip feed. This visibility compresses comparison into our everyday lives, making spending a highly public signal. This brings us to a really vital concept, something called cultural slack. Basically, this is the distance between what your environment is pushing you to spend and what you actually choose to spend. The problem is, as social media artificially raises our perceived norms way faster than our actual real income grows, our cultural slack shrinks. The baseline for what looks normal just quietly keeps moving up, and that leaving us incredibly vulnerable to this constant pressure to upgrade our lives. And this vulnerability is only made worse by our cultural taboos around actually talking about money. For example, the source material highlights Italy. While the culture beautifully embraces that la dolce vita lifestyle of pleasure and presentation, there's this quiet reluctance to plan explicitly. Get this, 40% of young Italians aged 18 to 34 never discuss money at home. Never. It's often seen as taboo, which makes it incredibly difficult to build strong, healthy financial boundaries. So, the crucial takeaway here is really summarized perfectly. The environment sells upgrades, while the culture doesn't reliably teach planning. When you combine this incredibly aggressive consumer environment with a total lack of open financial education, your cultural slack just leaks away. We are caught between a culture demanding that we spend and families that just don't talk about how to save, which leads us right into our next big trap.
So let's zoom in on the buyer's remorse trap. What actually happens in your mind the moment you succumb to all this pressure?
Well, to understand that, we're actually looking at a recent business school exam paper on consumer behavior. I find this absolutely fascinating because it pulls back the curtain on exactly how the corporate world views our internal conflicts. Brands like Gucci, Chanel, and Rolls-Royce, they know that luxury purchases involve massive financial investments, and they know exactly what happens in your brain the second you swipe your card. And this completely explains why we feel guilty. In psychology, it's called cognitive dissonance. It's that jarring psychological conflict that kicks in right after you buy something really expensive. Literally the moment the transaction is complete, your beliefs and your actions clash. You immediately start sweating, questioning if your decision was actually rational or if you just made a huge mistake. Now, for luxury products specifically, this case study tells us this mental friction is caused by three main things. First, the massive financial commitment. You start wondering, man, should I have put that money somewhere else? Second is social perception. There's this deep fear of being judged as materialistic or frivolous by your friends. And third, you have sky-high quality expectations, meaning even the absolute tiniest flaw in that product is going to amplify your feelings of deep regret. But don't worry, the luxury brands have a playbook for this, and it is a closely guarded set of strategies designed to manage your psychology so you don't return the product. This exam case study explicitly outlines 4 highly specific tactics these luxury brands deploy to soothe your internal conflict and basically help you justify your own massive purchase. They don't just sell you the item and walk away. No way. They actively engineer your post-purchase feelings so you don't warn your friends about buyer's remorse. Let's break down the exact 4 steps they use on us. Step 1 is pre-purchase assurance. Brands like Hermes will heavily highlight their rich heritage to reassure you before you even make the purchase. Step 2, post-purchase engagement. This is that incredibly personalized thank you note from Louis Vuitton designed to make you feel super valued. Step 3 is social validation. They actively encourage specific hashtags so you get that sweet affirmation from your peers. And finally, step 4 is experiential value. Think of Rolls-Royce offering you a bespoke factory tour so you feel personally tied to their legacy. So how do we push back against all of this? Let's talk about reclaiming your cultural slack. Understanding these engineered tactics is step 1. Because these brands know exactly what is at stake here. The case study makes it crystal clear. If a brand can successfully manage your cognitive dissonance, they aren't just preventing you from feeling buyer's remorse. No, a customer who feels validated in their crazy purchase decision becomes a lifelong loyal advocate. They're way more likely to come back and buy again. These companies are effectively hijacking your natural biological guilt, and they're converting it into brand loyalty. It's wild. To protect yourself from the macroeconomy constantly pushing you to spend, and from these micro-marketing hacks trying to manage your guilt, you have to consciously build a firewall. You literally have to build a cultural firewall against this constant environmental pressure that's trying to normalize more, newer, and better. Because if you don't intentionally build systems and boundaries for yourself, the default culture is just going to make all your spending decisions for you. We've journeyed all the way from the 2/3 of GDP driving our massive economy, right down to the handwritten notes luxury brands use to quiet our cognitive dissonance. So I want to leave you with this. Take a moment to reflect before your next swipe at the checkout counter. Ask yourself, are you really making the choice, or is the cultural engine driving the car? Thanks for joining this explainer, and we'll catch you next time.